Okay, good afternoon, guys. Let me just quickly introduce this session to you just to make sure you're in the right place and you're not going to fall asleep on me. This is Cloud-Orientated Architecture in a Retail Business Scenario. It's a really, really long-winded title, which I didn't really think about when I actually put the submission in. It's going to be a level 200 session, so if you're expecting deep technical content, now's the time to leave. What we're actually going to look through is just some of the concepts around cloud computing and how it applies to the retail industry currently in Australia and New Zealand. My name is Lewis Bench. I'm from Datacom Australia. I have a really, really fancy title of I'm a Commerce Server Solutions Architect. It means I now have a real job, and I specialize in a product called Microsoft Commerce Server, which is Microsoft's e-commerce platform. Before I moved to Datacom, I actually worked for a few different digital marketing companies looking at technical strategy in the retail sector. So I'm the type of guy that actually goes out and builds and sells the solutions you saw in our keynote today. So looking at things like Surface, Windows Phone 7, and all the back-end systems that tie things together. So today we're going to break the session down in a few different pieces. It's going to be very much death by PowerPoint, so I'm very open to making this a conversational piece. So if you do have questions or discussion points you want to shout out throughout, as long as you're not going to heckle me, I'm quite fine to take them and I'll answer them as I go. So we're going to look primarily at the retail industry. So we're going to discuss why retail. Then I'm going to move on to the clouds. Then I'm going to look at the two together and the architectural points and the technology there and how it all works together. And then I'm going to talk you through some case studies that Microsoft have published. And then if we have time at the end, we'll look at some questions and answers as well. So why retail? When I was putting this slide deck together, this quote really, really summed things up for me. A revolution doesn't happen when society adopts a new tool. It happens when society adopts a new behavior. This is really where we are at the moment. Consumers, when they've interacted with businesses, have completely changed their mindset about how they actually want to interact. This is a revolution for the retail industry because it's the first time that we're interacting with someone on a passive basis. We're not trying to actively sell, and we're not trying to harass them when they come into our store. So it's really, really opening the mindsets for the retail industry. It's actually changing the way consumers actually look at how they buy as well. So if you now look at this flowchart, point of sale actually starts a research stage. People are very, very information rich now. So things like Twitter allow people to crowdsource and receive peer recommendations on products before they actually go to purchase. So if I'm going to buy a new laptop, and this is a process I've gone through recently, I actually put a tweet out asking my friends and my peers to recommend a laptop to me. I get several recommendations back. I then hit a few different web portals. All of these web portals give me various reviews and recommendations, technical information. But at that point, I'm not just going to commit to buy. I'm going to go out, I'm going to use things like Bing, Google, I'm going to use pricing comparison sites, I'm going to hit sites in the US, in the UK, Australia, New Zealand, looking at various prices, looking at various information. I'm going to look for feedback to see whether it's faulty, whether it's not faulty. And then at that point, I'm going to step away and make a decision. I'm not expecting to be forcefully sold information. I'm expecting to be able to make my decision and then come back. And when I arrive back at the site knows who I am. It knows that I've been here in the past, and it knows the products I've looked at. Really, really good example of this is someone like Amazon. If you go and browse a few books on the site, even if you're an anonymous user, it'll drop a cookie on your site, on your browser. It'll store your profile. Next time you come back in, it says, these are all the products you've recently browsed. Once I finally receive that information, I will then proceed to actually purchase. The actual situation that we are purchasing now is that we don't want people to actively ask us for information. There's this big concern with consumers around large retailers actually storing a lot of information. I've come from the UK, and I've actively seen people store credit card information on a CD, and that CD get lost or left on the train. All of this has been in the media, and there is large amounts of concern around it. I actually don't like the intrusiveness of this either. So if I go onto Amazon and I want to buy books, why is Amazon asking me my date of birth? They don't need to know my date of birth. I'm buying a book. I understand if I'm buying an R18 game, an R18 movie, or I'm buying liquor, but a book, they don't need to know that. So this is where we start to look at things like OpenID and Facebook. We don't have to store user profiles. We can actually look into an existing profile provider. Same goes for payment. We don't need to capture payment details if we don't have to. A lot of people like PayPal and Visa are now offering us APIs to offload that service so we don't risk that security and we don't breach the confidence of the consumer. Then it goes into a cycle. So once we've purchased, the social networking and the media comes back in the social media comes back in again. It's more than likely that if I've had a good service, I'm going to start telling people. I'm going to get on Twitter, I'm going to get on Facebook, and I'm going to post my comments and my reviews. If I've had a bad service, people are more likely going to hear about it even more. So this comes back into the research, the cycle starts again, and it's really, really important to grasp these concepts. The use of this information has opened up to what's now called a connected consumer. So when Microsoft looked at their retail strategy a few years ago, they launched something called the connected experience. Connected experience for retail, connected experience for hospitality. The whole process is about a journey of engaging with your consumer at several different levels. And they went out and they've done a study and they realized that this is where the consumer is now. We've talked about they have change in habits, but they also have limited amounts of finance. With the result of the global financial crisis, people are more likely to actually research and go out and explore different options of buying things as opposed to committing first time they see something. They're penny pinching, they're trading down, and they're shifting to different channels. 70% of people in Australia and more in the US own a smartphone, of which that's their primary medium for ordering things like pizza. And in the US, things like Netflix are now offering video on demand on their mobile devices. So normal point of sale and online web portals are no longer the correct medium to be targeting these people. The connected experience is also about the innovation in technology. Things like natural user interface, cloud computing, and social computing all means that we have to engage with our consumers at a different level. Every day we goes past, consumers are getting more and more technically confident. If you look at the keynote that we had today, the mobile phone, the tablet PC, the service PC, these aren't alien concepts. These are things I can walk out into Australian cities and US cities and actually see in stores today. With the introduction of the iPhone, the iPad, Windows 7, natural user interfaces are becoming more and more apparent in everyday technology. You'll start to see with the launch of Kinect, it becoming one step further. Things like touch and augmented reality are going to be really, really big players in the retail industry. So we need to know how we can adapt our selling process to incorporate these. Cloud computing is another thing that we need to look at, and is the basis of this talk. Cloud computing reduces our economies of scale and allows the services that we need to actually operate to exist. Social computing I'll talk about at great length. It's what's driving a lot of this, and we need to be concerned around the BI and the analytics of how we can look at social computing. Green IT is another big area. Consumer confidence isn't just about the actual sale of goods, it's around the reputation of that company. And if that company steps up and says we're doing something to make a difference to you and your children and your children's children by reducing cutting our carbon emissions and improving our green footprint, then that's going to help you to win. Analytics and is key to loyalty programs, so we need to be able to harness all this information. If we're targeting other devices, iPhones, TVs, boxes, we need to be able to harness this information and use it for loyalty processes. And lastly, mobility. Like I say, 70% of devices. And we need to be able to target all of our applications so it can cross mobile channels and provide that consistent interface. So the cloud. The biggest grievance I have with cloud computing is no one really understands what the cloud computing is. So one thing I want people to take from my session today is that cloud computing is a jargon, and it's what causes a lot of confusion with business decision makers. So if you ever go into a board meeting or a meeting with a client and they want to talk about the cloud, just have to sort of slap them around the head. Cloud computing is actually 3 different concepts. And they're primarily software as a service, infrastructure as a service, and platform as a service. If you go into Wikipedia, cloud computing is actually defined as an internet-based computing whereby shared resources, software, and information are provided to computers and other devices on demand like a public utility. When we talk about public utilities, we normally think of things like the Industrial Revolution, whereby if we wanted to produce and sell our goods, we had to facilitate our own plumbing, our own generation and electricity. We had to shovel our own coal. We're looking at this revolution now we're going through with retail and other industries, and thinking cloud computing is going to be the back end of that. Cloud computing is our utility service that was for the Industrial Revolution. Is going to provide the flexibility and the capabilities of us expanding into these different channels. So the first area I'll talk about is software as a service. Software as a service is typical to what we know and use today. Standard software like Microsoft Office, Excel, Word, PowerPoint. However, it's on a different licensing model. Pay-as-you-go licensing makes it really, really efficient for shifting initial investment to operational costs, which is one of the reasons it has a great uptake throughout enterprise. It also allows us as retailers to distribute information between disparate locations, like stores around the world, without providing wide area networks or VPNs. Software as a service also comes in different flavors as well. Things like Xbox Live is a great retail medium. You see things like Netflix being really, really successful, and you'll start to see things like Foxtel in Australia as well, launching off the Xbox Live platform. The advertising potential of Xbox is also really significant. It's more likely I'm going to sell more pizzas by advertising on Xbox than it would be through any website I could advertise on. Other software as a service you start to see is things like accounting packages as well. Typically to where you would go out and buy something in a stationary store to actually do your day-to-day business with, that's now become a utility that you can use in a pay-as-you-go model. The next one is platform as a service. Platform as a service is all about lowering the cost of developing your application and not worrying about any infrastructure underneath. In the Microsoft stack, the platform as a service is offered to you as Windows Azure. So Windows Azure allows us to do .NET development as per any other server hosting environment. What Windows Azure offers you, though, is everything from IIS upwards. So you can host .NET 4 applications or .NET 3.5 applications in the cloud and no need to worry about the cost of infrastructure, the cost of ongoing support, or the SLA or high availability. It's also API driven. So if we want to be able to provide extensibility, we can do that dynamically using the tools provided with us. The big benefit here, though, is it lowers the overall cost. The economies of scale that Microsoft Data Center provides us with, again, shifts the cost of putting our stuff into the cloud from initial to ongoing. It's a pay-as-you-go model, which we can offset from our profit and loss. And the last topic I want to quickly touch on is infrastructure as a service. So infrastructure as a service is the biggest popular option for e-commerce. It's scale as you grow virtualized infrastructure. It's fully automated with an API, so it means that if you're 70% capacity, you can easily spin up a new machine dynamically using the libraries provided to you. Infrastructure as a service also leverages global data centers and provides functionality like a CDN as well, which is a content distribution network. And they're pooled resources sitting on top of virtualized hardware. Again, they're pay-as-you-go, and they're provided via various telcos around the world, things like Rackspace and GoGrid in the US, Telstra over in Australia. Windows Azure will also soon allow this as well. You'll soon be able to create a virtual hard disk and upload it to your Azure platform to host infrastructure as a service, and that's due to launch quite soon. So I actually want to touch on some scenarios around how this technology is actually going to get used. So if we look at what we saw in the keynote tonight around how multiple touch points should be involved in the consumer environment, it's all around the use of services. So the demonstration was around WCF sitting up in the cloud, talking to things like Surface, talking to things like Windows 97 and Windows 7 devices. All of this is facilitated using Windows Azure. So the idea around Foxtel or other case studies that I'll talk about later on is that you're using SQL Azure for a scalable database structure. You're using Windows Azure to host your services in a web process or a worker process. All of the client technologies, including non-Microsoft stacks like iPhones, they can talk natively to the SOAP services that are exposed. The journey that we need to build for our consumers to meet this revolution that's going on is around being able to persist through different devices. So it's always the case that if you originate a journey on a mobile phone, I'm ordering a pizza on a mobile phone, I should then be able to move to a Windows 7 device and still track that journey. I should then be able to move to my social networking site, and that social networking site is aware that I've ordered that pizza, and I can update my Facebook status or my Twitter message to link into that. The infrastructure and the underlying technology should just allow me to expand natively, and it shouldn't rely on things like state. So using platforms like Windows Azure or infrastructure as a service, I need to be aware of this when I actually build my demos, my applications. Parts of the technology that actually allows to facilitate this is the Azure Service Bus. So the Azure Service Bus provides rich functionality to connect devices that are disparate and have only sight of the internet and no actual VPN or tunneled connection. So when we actually look at putting a Surface in a shopping centre or in an airport, and we put a point of sale system in a store miles and miles away from our head office, normally we would have to pay out for an infrastructure at high amounts of cost, and we'd have to host that throughout the year. The Service Bus allows us to use a single internet connection, just a standard broadband connection, to actually connect back to a service on the web. So the idea would be if we put a Surface in a shopping centre, we can actually put a small WCF service endpoint on that device, and then we can talk freely to and from that device via the Service Bus. The same goes for a point of sale system. When we actually build the point of sale systems, we normally have to look at VPN tunnels to harness this information backwards and forwards. They're very, very expensive and very, very costly. And over in Australia, when you talk about rural environments as well, facilitating a VPN tunnel where there's barely a 56K or an ISDN connection is going to be a really, really big struggle. So we look at the Service Bus again for VPN. We put a small WCF endpoint, a WCF client, on the back of the SQL server or the Access database that's running our point of sale system. We expose this back into a head office, and we can push and pull information securely over HTTPS without any complicated infrastructure. Again, the Azure Service Bus is a pay-as-you-go model. No initial infrastructure cost, only an ongoing operational cost, which is offset against any type of profit you're making out of the sale, and they can be spawned on an ad hoc basis. This means that if I'm forecasting for 300 stores in the future, and I only ever manage to open 50 of them, I only actually buy 50 and use 50 connections. I don't have 300 connections sitting there for no reason. The other thing to think about when you're looking at the Azure Service Bus, and it was a conversation that came up last week at TechEd in Australia, was what happens if the application goes offline. So another thing to think about would be something like the Microsoft Sync provider. Sync providers allow us to cache temporarily in the localized database information that's exposed by WCF. So there's no reason that if you are in a disparate location, you're building things like point of sale or Surface, and you know that the internet's going to be flaky, put a sync provider in front of it. It will do all the caching and the persistence for you, and then once you reconnect to the main service and you have an internet connection again, it'll push all the information up, and then Sync Services will actually handle all the connection for you. This has been tried and tested with things like Microsoft Commerce Server as well, and it's a really, really good way of working. The other part of the Azure App Fabric is federated identity. Federated identity is a crucial part of the infrastructure when we talk about crossing between devices. So if we're hosting a service that's meant to talk to a mobile phone, it's meant to talk to Surface, it's meant to talk to the website, how do we make sure there's a consistent authentication between all three devices? Normal web portals rely on forms authentication, but you look at something like an iPhone or a Windows Phone 7 device, you can't do that. Federated identity allows us to use token-based authentication to control how we talk to all of our different services. These tokens now can actually be issued by OpenID, such as Twitter or Facebook, or they can be issued by a known provider like ADFS, Active Directory. So this means that we can use the Azure Access Control platform for things like for consumers and B2B business. The access control allows us to actually operate on all devices. So we can connect via the iPhone, we connect via Facebook, we can connect via Windows 7, Surface, and the web. And it allows us to persist the information backwards and forwards just using a single token, which can be passed in our SOAP message. So another big concern around the cloud is security. The first thing here is PCI compliance. So as you may or may not be aware, PCI is a must for anyone that's transacting on the internet. The PCI governs any type of origination, transfer, or storing of credit card information or payment information. So one big thing to note here is Azure is not PCI compliant. It's going to be soon. No one knows when. It's going through the audit process as per any other data center. So when you actually start to build your e-commerce portals and you're hosting your services up in the cloud, you have to think, what do I do around payment devices? If I can't store, originate, or transact any type of credit card information, how's this going to work for me? So this comes back to things like PayPal or hosted merchant providers. If you can offload that responsibility to someone else, you're improving consumer confidence because you're not attempting to store that information and you're then utilizing an API that means you're staying compliant within the required standards. What PayPal does offer, though, is a degraded user experience. So you need to balance this up around how you're trying to provide that functionality. You can't use a hosted form if you're looking at integrating with a mobile device. So at that point, you then need to use an API. So you may have to step back from platform as a service to infrastructure as a service. Infrastructure as a service is provided by existing data centers that do meet SAS 70 and PCI compliance. So people like GoGrid openly advertise that they are PCI compliant because it's a competitive advantage for them. So although you're managing the infrastructure still, you still have the elasticity, but you don't have to worry around security. The other thing to think about is physical access. Where's your data being stored? Certain legislation, statute, means you can't store transactional information offshore. So if information is being put in the cloud, you need to know where that data center is going to be. If you commission a SQL Azure instance, you're told that data center is going to be in Asia. But you don't know whether that's going to be Hong Kong, Singapore, or where else Microsoft's got data centers. They sporadically open data centers more and more to improve on the service they offer. But again, it's in the cloud. It's just up there. You don't know where it's going to be. So you need to think about this, and you need to talk to your provider before you actually commit to make sure you're within the realms of what information you can store. The next one's backup and data loss, which seems like a really, really strange thing to talk about when you're talking about the cloud, because the cloud is the cloud. It's like triple redundant. But what happens if the cloud goes bust? There's known providers out there that are taking a gamble on cloud services. But what happens if what happens if they back out? What happens if it's financially unstable? So you really need to think about not only putting information in the cloud, but also taking a copy offline. The other thing to think about as well is that information may need to be used for analytics and processing. Putting it in SQL Azure or infrastructure as a service, although it's great for latency of your consumer, is it close to your head office to be running batch queries, to be running reports, and really heavy information processing? So keeping information in your office or in a secure location for backup purposes is always a really good idea. Again, with SLAs and terms of service, you need to make sure that this is going to be a primary business channel for you. Is it always going to be available? What happens if that one data center goes offline? Is it disaster recovered elsewhere around the globe? Is it disaster recovered elsewhere around the country if you can't go offshore? So conversations that still need to be had. If you do have VPN and tunnel reliance, so you're tunneling into a point-of-sale system, you're tunneling into an existing extranet or WAN, again, infrastructure as a service, Azure, they're all shared firewalls. So you need to think about how this is going to work for you. Do you need to then look at reverting to the service bus? Do you need to look at exposing publicly some services from your network so you can talk backwards and forwards? The big architectural questions that you need to understand before you commit to this type of service. So security is one of the negatives of the cloud, but this is one of the positives. Flexibility, scalability, reliability. I talked a lot about reducing initial investment. This is the biggest benefit in e-commerce hosting on the cloud. You could achieve everything I talked about today using hosted services, but it would cost a lot of money. When I look at building e-commerce sites, we always design for the peak. The peak's going to be the week before Christmas. Black Saturday, they call it in the US. It's going to be when people get their pay, they go shopping, and they've got to do that last minute bit of spend. I need to always be able to cater for that demand. So that means that 300 days a year, them servers are going to be sitting idle somewhere. Cloud strategy, the whole point around this cloud strategy is it allows us to ramp up. So it reduces our initial cost. As soon as we hit that week, we can sporadically deploy the extra services we need using an API. Once we know that load's dropped, and we can do this using things like performance monitors, and we can do it all pragmatically, no manual involvement, we can tear the servers back down again. We're only committed for what we pay for. It's all pay as you go. Azure is measured in the amount of computing power, the amount of memory, and the amount of bandwidth. So it's not even the hours it's on, it's just what's being used. We can also look with the cloud at things like geoscaling and reliability. We can, if we are an international vendor, we can look at mirroring our servers around the world to improve efficiency and improve that customer service. If it's the last week before Christmas and I'm desperately trying to order presents, I don't want to be sitting there while the page is lagging. I want an optimum experience where I can pull down the page within seconds. We can also look at things like CDN as well. If we are only targeting Australia or Southeast Asia, but we are a heavy image-based site, heavy media-based site within things like MP3s, within ebooks, other type of digital media, the Azure CDN or other CDNs that are available is a really good option for this. All the CDN does is mirror the images and the assets that you're needing to be pulled down around the world, so it's coming from a server that's closer to the user. All of this is around improving customer experience and reducing costs. So I just really want to talk about now how some of this is actually put into practice. So I'm not sure whether you guys would have seen this. I'm more likely you would have. But when Microsoft Surface launched in Australia, Amnesia Razorfish built a proof of concept for Lonely Planet. In Sydney Airport, there's a Lonely Planet store. Lonely Planet being the books you buy if you're going traveling. Very asset heavy. Images, blog posts, reviews, video, all on a specific location. So the experience is all around engaging with the consumer at different levels. They wanted people to be able to pick stuff up on the mobile device, pick stuff up on the web, but also interact with customers and staff within a store. So what they've done is they tagged up a book. Surface recognizes object tags, which are little barcodes that sit on the back of the books. And what they've done is pushed all their video and assets up into the Azure CDN, stored all their product information into SQL Azure. When the book touches Azure, touches Surface, Surface recognizes a number, goes off to SQL Azure via a WCF service hosted on Azure, pulls all the information back. Surface is just WPF. It's very easy to build, very quick and cheap to build. The experience, though, is what's being provided, is what's financially viable and what's being provided to the consumer. It's engaging to the consumer to be able to play around with these images because it then supports the sale of the book. You can also engage socially and look at the content that's not in the book, which would traditionally be available on the website. What Amnesia Razorfish also done is they built a loyalty card up, which is this little passport image that you can see on the photo. Again, that had a different type of object tag, which was a different number stored in a different part of the database. When that was placed down, it recognized that was a loyalty card. Displayed an instance that you could drag assets onto. The assets then got persisted back into Azure, so if you then went home, typed in the same number, you could pull everything down again. The whole reason this was developed was around this journey. They wanted to be able to interact at different levels, so if you went into store, you could play with the book, you could get all your assets, buy the book, take it home, and still be able to watch the videos, the blog posts, and everything you've played around with in store. You could also pass recommendations backwards and forwards and increase the cross-sell opportunities, because if someone's playing with an Antarctica book and someone else is playing with a Las Vegas book, and you see there's great content between the two, you can share it, and then potentially you're going to be interested in purchasing that. This is one of my favorite stories that came out of this year when it was launched, and I'm not sure whether anyone knows of this. And if you're from Europe, you'll be familiar with EasyJet. When EasyJet launched, it was all around low costs. They're the Jetstar of the UK. So they needed to reduce operational costs. They needed to reduce initial investment to keep prices low. But the problem is the standard operating environment of an airport is obviously pretty secure. So when you go into an airport, you're given a terminal with an internet connection and very locked down version of Windows. They needed to build a point of sale system around this, and they wasn't sure how they was going to achieve it with such a restrictive environment. So they actually used the service bus. They deployed a very small, thin client on the terminal, and used Windows Azure to actually host all the functionality. When they actually achieved this, they managed to keep costs down while providing a very, very effective service. This has now been operational for about 2 years, and it all runs through Azure. All the head office connects to the SQL Azure database for reporting, and there's 70, 80 terminals around the UK that actually connect to this. A similar story is Domino's in the US. They had the same issue as most retailers have at Christmas, but they have it at Super Bowl. Americans seem to like eating pizza when it comes to Super Bowl. So they wanted to be able to cater for this, and they wanted to be able to not have to pay out the initial investment just for that one time of the year. So what they've done is they offloaded it to Windows Azure. They wanted to stay PCI compliant, so what they've done is just looking at offloading things like the catalog browsing, so small parts of their website to Windows Azure, the stuff that's going to get hit the most. So what happens is when it comes around to Super Bowl time, they spin up their Windows Azure instance, and they have the performance monitor watching their servers. As soon as the load hits 60%, they then talk to the Azure API, commission a new web worker role, then the site starts to offload to that, and again, when that starts to hit peak, then they spin up a new Windows worker role. They operate just literally for 24 hours. That's all it does, Super Bowl day. Once it's all done, it gets teared down, and then the next one starts next year. And the last presentation, the last case study is Audi. Audi made a video around their changes in their website, which I just want to play. It sort of sums up the journey that I've been talking about and the revolution that we're having in this retail industry today.
Your audience loves you. But they hate the way you do the web. Time changed. Let's lose the endless searching. Kill the confusion of the old thinking. Let's give them something new. Something fluid, dynamic, immersive. Something to remember. Your strength is in detail, so let them have it. Up front. Whatever it is, whenever they want it. All delivered dynamically, an ever-changing interface. Give them control to explore and discover. A deeply interactive experience, an intuitive path. Everything becomes easy to find and do. Upsell, cross-sell, when it's helpful, not hated. Offer them intelligent solutions. Take them on a seamless journey. This is not a microsite, a configurator, an order form, a tracker, or place they come back to as owners. This is all of them. In one adaptive, simple, and innovative piece of web engineering that will put Audi where it belongs. Out in front.
So when Audi went out to build their new website, they wanted to build something that represented their brand. So, as it said, they removed the clutter, they heavily personalized it, it was very loyalty-driven. It took a lot of compute power, there was a lot of assets, so the cloud was a perfect solution for them. So using things like Windows Azure means that they don't have to worry about the infrastructure costs and scaling out the demand placed on things like the Silverlight instances and the complex algorithms that are run when users hit that site. Using the CDN removes the latency from when people visit their site, and they can start to watch the videos in real time. Using the services that Azure would provide means that they can then take that interaction off the website and be able to interact with it on the device. So when you're looking for things like service dealers, you can have a profile and access that information in real time on the device. Audi sums up really what I wanted to get across today. Was it's a journey that these people are after. It's not just a single interaction with the point of sale anymore. It's all about starting and researching information, exploring the portals, progressing, moving into store, moving back online, moving to mobile devices. When we look at retail architecture, it's all about making sure that that journey in the consumer is connected. And this was one of the slides that the guys in Australia asked me to put up, because when we look at the Microsoft stack, it's one of the few stacks that allows us to do this really, really easily. We look at things like Silverlight, and it can pretty much do it all. It can offer a out-browser in-store experience, it can offer an online experience, it can offer a mobile experience. Azure provides us the infrastructure to do that. It allows us to scale out and scale back in again with no upfront costs. Things like Surface, Windows Phone 7, WPF, they're all the same programming language. They're all based on XAML. So really, when we look at retail architecture, it's just looking at the skills we have, it's looking at the technology we have, and then looking at how we apply it. Retail architecture is all about journey, and it's all about engaging our consumers at different levels. So it's not technically challenging, it's just thinking about a different way of actually achieving this. So I've actually whizzed through that a lot quicker than I hoped. So I've now got 15 minutes or so to answer questions if anyone wants to talk about this.
Social networking sites or their successors will be cluttered up with lots and lots of dead and redundant data of people that have died, people that have moved on, people that have changed their address and haven't updated their site and so on. So you're going to get the database administrator's version of hell, vast amounts of data, and very difficult to know what is actually robust and reliable. So you'll either get annoyed customers, sort of, why are you sending this to me? I don't want it anymore. Or you're going to get a lot of waste of resources, waste of time trying to contact people that have been dead for 10 years.
Sure. It's a conversation I had with the guys at .NET Rocks last week. And the question, if no one heard it, was around what do you do around clutter on social networking sites? And I think the social networking sites as a way of managing profiles is actually a better way of doing things. I'm more than likely to actually go in as a Facebook user or a Twitter user and update my email address and update my contact information because I'm exposing it to my peers and my friends. I'm less likely to go on to an online store that I've transacted at 2 or 3 times in my lifetime and update my email address. So although, yes, you will still get profiles that are created and then people will move away from that site. If you strategically look at these types of things and you look at Facebook, Twitter, Foursquare, these are the industry leaders, people like MySpace as well, then you're more than likely going to maintain accurate information over if someone just registered to your site once and then disappeared again. There's also a big privacy thing on places like Facebook. Although no one actually understands the privacy agreements on Facebook, that people are still a little bit skeptical around storing information. So you do have to cater for the lowest common denominator when you target these sites. So you need to just look at targeting things like email address. But I still think it's a really, really good way of actually persistent information, especially at least for the next 2 to 3 years. I can't forecast for the next 10 years. I'm not an analyst and I wouldn't want to do that. But within the next 10 years, I would even predict that we won't be using web portals anyway, and we would have moved away from that altogether. And looking at conversations with people like August, that's more than likely going to happen, and we're going to move into the next generation of computing, and social networking would have developed in that sense as well. Does that answer your question? Any more? No? Okay then, I'm going to end up wrapping up 15 minutes early, so sorry about that, but have a good afternoon.